Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our Business Leaders panel. Our moderator, journalist and author, Kate Russel. Co-founder and CEO, Risparmiosuper, Barbara Labate. Managing Director, SAP Austria, Klaus Sickinger. Former CEO, Alcatel-Lucent, Ben Verwaayen. And Nutanix Vice President EMEA, Kaddaras.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. It's great to be here in Vienna to talk to you today about disruption. Disruption, digital transformation. They're buzz phrases that we hear all over the media, startup junkies, entrepreneurs. Everybody talks about them. Everybody wants to be part of the disruption story. But how often do you actually take a step back and think, what does it mean? What does disruption actually mean? So thank you so much to my panelists for joining me today. We've sort of taken a selection of different kind of disciplines across the sort of startup entrepreneurial field within Europe to try and get to the bottom a bit more of what this disruption thing is, should we be part of it, and how is it going to change the way we do business in the future? And so Barbara, perhaps we could start with you. If you could very briefly sort of like give us a snapshot of who you are and what you do, and give us your definition of disruption.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I think in this case I represent the startup world. I'm an entrepreneur. I started like in 2007, my first company, then my second. I'm now CEO of comparison website for retailers. And we have been in a way disruptive because we wanted to show and compare prices for grocery retailers when everybody was trying to keep those data secret. So in a way, we were actually very disruptive. And right now, we are offering an e-commerce platform that is disruptive because it's fully customizable and it's helping retailers, especially in the grocery store area where they still are facing the offline world and they're very focused on the offline world. So we are trying to disrupt the e-commerce sector. For the disruption question, well, I actually looked up in the dictionary and tried to see what's the definition. And it comes up with comes from Latin, and it says it's breaking something, like the line, a phone line, and things like that. And I've been thinking about the major unicorns that we have, startups, and then there are now unicorns. Like Airbnb is now the biggest hotel chain, but owns no buildings, no real estate. Or Uber is the biggest taxi company and owns no cars. Or Facebook is becoming the biggest media company and actually has no journalists, and so on and so on. So what they did, I think they created a need, and they created a new market, a new value, and they did it sometimes also going against the local laws. Because, well, Uber, for example, in Italy was and probably still is illegal. Airbnb is now illegal in New York. So they have been trying to create a need and then trying to cope with local laws. And I think established companies have to really be aware that once they get in that space, they cannot go back. I think nobody will ever want Airbnb to disappear or Uber to shut down. So it's really a changing game. It's called disruption because it's changing, and then you have to build something new after that.
Well, Klaus, I mean, you're with SAP, so we all know what SAP does. Disruption, it's got kind of negative connotations in sort of, the global general sense. I mean, you just got to ask people in America at the moment and a few months ago in the UK what disruption feels like, sort of personally. But from a business perspective, what is your definition? Do we need to be disruptive to be successful?
Right. I think that is a very good question, and you mentioned everybody knows SAP. Sometimes I want to question that because I think for 30 or 40 years SAP was the ERP company, And I think we're still by far the biggest provider of business software worldwide. However, the company is going through a massive change. And when you read our tagline, it says it's a cloud company powered by HANA. It doesn't say that's the ERP company. So we are going through a massive change. And I think part of it has to do with disruption of the business model. Because for 40 years, we went out, we developed software, and then we licensed the usage rights. And our customers would set up projects and at some stage get a benefit out of the solutions they built. When I look at the marketplace now, it's not going to happen anymore. Companies do expect, and our customers do expect, to pay for the value of the solution rather than the right to use a license. And that has changed the business very much. I think it actually helps us to transform. Some of it is disruptive, some of it is evolutionary. And when I look at startups, I think there's also different ways to go. Some of them might be disruptive, and you mentioned a few of them, especially the ones that go into the B2C space. Yep. I see a lot of successful startups as well, that work very successful in the B2B area by adding on top of something that's already there. So I think there's different ways of taking that.
Well, Ben, you've got a wealth of entrepreneurial experience yourself, but also can perhaps give us a bit more of the investment kind of angle as well in terms of your experience. But what does disruption mean to you in the sense of doing business?
So I've been lucky enough to be almost 40 years on the side of large corporations and leading them through very painful transitions. And now I have the opportunity to look to scale-ups and the growth of new ideas. But actually, disruption is never a goal in and by itself. It happens to be perceived as disruption or transformation, but those are just observations from a process that is built for a very different reason. I'm pretty sure if I ask the audience how they are perceived in their own organizations, that for a long time, people who dealt with technology were seen as enablers. People who built platforms so normal people could do something that was the goal of the company. And what has massively changed, because of computing, of difference of connectivity, hyperconnectivity, is the ability that technology now becomes part of the strategy. That is disruption. And therefore, you can fulfill needs of customers in a very different way. That's the whole game. And we find a library of words around it, but what actually the core of the disruption is ability to do things better.
Yeah. So it's almost hyper-enabling in some ways, using technology. I mean, Chris, your perspective of it, from a very disruptive unicorn company, how would you sort of approach the question of trying to describe what disruption is, and indeed how it may change the way we do business in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'll tell you first, I'm in a position personally where I'm a convert, right? I've been part of an industry for the last 24 years where I've, let's call it preach traditional architectures, preach traditional thinking. And just recently I've looked at disrupting myself. So when you're in the middle of a disruption yourself, you have a unique advantage or a viewpoint. What we're seeing and what I see is that we need to spend our time and our effort understanding customers that are ready for this and where the industry is ready for this. And that's where, unless you're ready, unless you've come to a realization, and sometimes, unfortunately, you have to have either received enough discomfort or pain to want to transform yourself, or it's brought upon, in a different way, right? You have the intellectual capacity to bring it there. So what we're seeing is how we address our customers. We do a lot of education. We do a lot of support to understand that you can do something differently to achieve a goal in a different way, in a more productive way. And that's what we spend a lot of our time at within Nutanix today, is finding those customers who are ready to transform. I will actually, I'll quote Dr. Langer, who said this yesterday in a session around disruption and the definition. I liked his definition, which was, it's simple, right? As you define it by something that's simple. And that, to me, puts it in a whole different paradigm.
Now, we're here in Europe, and we tend to sort of like look across the pond to America and Silicon Valley for a lot of the kind of like, the disruptive global tech companies. We talk about Airbnb. Yeah. They come out of this sort of centralized hub on the American continent. And in Europe, we have sort of a different set of issues, really, because it's easy for us to forget that we've got a lot of really great tech startups, because I think perhaps the attention is more fragmented across the European continent. Different countries have their own Silicon Valley hubs, which obviously are much lower in scale. Ben, how European should we think in Europe if we want to compete on the global stage?
So for everything that you have said, you could have a counter-argument that gives it great strength. First of all, what's our definition of success? Is it a macro definition of success, or do we want to create household names? It is true that a more integrated market gives higher numbers and therefore a greater possibility to grow to something that is very rapidly a household name. But on the other hand, the diversity of what we have in talent in Europe also could make into a networked economy, and we're going to create a networked economy. Companies and people can't do it alone anymore and need to work with others. You could say that the diversity in language and cultural backgrounds for us gives an enormous advantage over a culture that is monolithical in their approaches in the US. So what may look like a disadvantage could be a big, big, big advantage.
Barbara, as a startup working in this kind of environment, what are the challenges that you face in terms of, location and proximity, within Europe? How do you choose your location?
Yeah, well, in a way, I agree with Ben, but on the other side, on the field, like being an entrepreneur, I've seen that it's really, Europe is still very fragmented, and we've been trying to describe Europe as the new pole for a new area for startups, for investing, attracting funds and VCs from the States, saying, well, hey, in Europe you can also build great startups. And reality is that, like, recently I tried to mentor a friend that is starting from zero, like really from zero startup, and she's trying to sell online bikinis. Okay, could be a good startup maybe. But the biggest problem is, like, how do I ship from a made in Italy product to the rest of Europe when, if I want to ship something to Austria, it's going to cost more the shipping than the product. And this shows how Europe is still very fragmented in terms of customs, tolls, laws. Again, I was talking about Airbnb. Now I talk with a small startup, but a big one has to face local laws. So every country has a different set of rules, and you have to take that into consideration whenever, even if you want to sell something that does not exist, like a service. Anyway, you have to face like different realities and even different customers and different behaviors. The thing that can probably save Europe in this is creating a common behavior online. So I'm trying to be as, let's say, more closer, like the European online behavior and being one European consumer, and in this way being and be like a US consumer, like having an online type of behavior that could create value. Otherwise, we're still a very tough market to face.
I mean, I guess, in some ways, Klaus, the European Commission's plans for the digital single market is driving towards that, creating a single consumer and supplier culture. What challenges do you, obviously as a company that spans many countries, do you suffer the same kind of problems, and what advice would you give for young startups from the perspective of SAP?
Well, I think from a startup perspective, it's probably a combination of those economic realities that Barbara just mentioned and the mindset. I mean, being here in Vienna, one must not forget that until 25 years ago, the way we did business, for example, as Austrian businesses, we looked either to the north, which was Germany, or we looked down to the south, that was Italy. Because on the eastern part of the country, the Iron Curtain would cut off everything that, would allow trade, communication, or whatever you had. So that mindset that that the world that is accessible to us has simply gotten much bigger. I think that's something, you know, that probably, you know, different to the US, we have to fully absorb. Then on the other hand, you know, there are ways, I think, that startups could use to bypass some of the challenges that Barbara has. So for example, we work closely with a startup, the name is Celonis, that has developed a fantastic product. And they realized bringing that to the market and establishing subsidiaries in every country and building their own sales force might probably take them years. And by then, that product might not be, you know, might not have the same impact on the market than it has now. So what they did is, and I think that was clever, they negotiated with SAP and said, well, can we put our product on your third-party price list? And by doing that, you know, within a couple of weeks, they got access to 300,000 of the biggest corporations on this globe and had 25,000 salespeople working for them. So, and they could use, you know, an existing infrastructure and knowledge that was already there, how to go to those markets, how to deal with regulations, and scale, you know, within weeks or months. So I think a cooperative approach, you know, might really help us to overcome. You know, the innovation circles and the technology changes are so fast and so short that you don't have the time to build out all the infrastructure that you might need, either to build the product or to sell it.
So look to collaborations with existing platforms that you can add something to. I mean, Ben, as an investor, you know, yourself, for somebody, you know, like in the position of Barbara's friend who's, you know, just starting out looking for investment, you know, she perhaps feels that this sort of fragmented nature of the marketplace and the talent pool is a barrier to getting the attention of investors. What would you say to those people? How can they get the attention of people like you and get that crucial early stage investment when they're sort of battling these issues?
So I have three remarks. The first remark is to what you just said. When I started my career, companies thought that innovation was between the four walls of their company. Today, people understand that you have to be a networked company. It's exactly what you said. You have to reach out and find partnerships that aren't partnerships for life, but help you to go to the next stage. So small and big need to work together, which is very difficult. Yep. I've tried it from the big side and couldn't understand why those, you know, those dummies on the other side couldn't work with us. Now sitting on the other side of the table, I fully understand what it means to be smaller and go into a large organization. And what you just said, you know, put yourself on a price list, sounds terrific, but if you haven't negotiated for the sales guy to get the same kind of commission selling that third-party product as a new product, and to do that will cost you 2 or 3 years to do that, you know, it won't happen anything. Now, your question, third point, how do you get attention? If it would be easy, everybody would overcome the hurdles. So sometimes you have to celebrate the hurdles because it makes you standing out. As a fund, we don't go and react on incoming traffic. We don't do that. We are theme-based and we're looking for the entrepreneurs. I don't look for the easy opportunity because everybody else will do that. I'm looking for the person who is capable to overcome hurdles and do it in a way that allows others to become better, whether it's a consumer or a B2B. And there are plenty in Europe. There are plenty. So my problem is not where are the opportunities. My problem is how can I help, not by money, but by Rolodex, experience, customers. How can I help to make sure that the few talents that we have that are really exceptional are going to become unicorns?
I mean, Chris, you know, in terms of location, you know, for you, what do you see driving people's choice of location? Is it talent pool, proximity to talent pool? Is it proximity to market, proximity to resources for, you know, production or manufacturing? You know, what are the important aspects when you're looking at a place like Europe in terms of choosing that location?
Sure. You know, it depends on the business that you're in, obviously, as to what you're going to search out. But for the most part, we see people looking for access to talent, right? In today's economy, in today's world, talent rules. Right, you have to find the right talent, the right type of talent for the business that you're in.
But in the digital age, can your talent not be anywhere in the world?
Yeah, it can be, right? But you have to figure out a way to harness that talent then, right? People are still social animals, right? So you have to figure a way, usually they like to be together or close. You can facilitate that over long distances if you do that in the right way with the right tool sets. So we see that as a big challenge of our customers is how do we make sure, again, I'll get back to the simple term, right, that we bring interaction between people, whether they're inside the company or future companies will be probably a collaboration of contractors, right? How do you create that environment where people feel like they're creating something special, right, that will cure a problem for a customer, end user customer, and that's really what companies are struggling with today. So yes, it's a search for talent. It doesn't always have to be co-located, but if you don't co-locate, what we see people doing is really spending a lot of time on how are you going to network these people to bring a common good.
Let's have a quick straw poll in the audience. We're going to have 3 choices, okay? Well, what do you think should drive your location? It's going to be proximity to talent, proximity to market, or proximity to resources that allow you to do your business. Let's start with resources. Okay? Marketplace, consumers, talent. Okay, and the rest of you, you don't really care, do you? You want to just be sitting on a beach with your computer. But, I think from that spattering of hands, there's general consensus that talent is the place. I mean, is that something that has pulled you towards your choice of location, Barbara?
Yeah, actually, talent and scarcity of resources. Because we all know that as an entrepreneur, if I have to look for developers in Silicon Valley, it's probably going to be very difficult. So talented people are very requested in that area. So I actually tried to build my entire development team in Sicily, which probably sounds weird, but there are lots of talented people and scarcity of jobs. And so I actually tried in the location the right talents. So I put together the 2 things. On the general or European market, I know that there are some poles that are becoming areas of attraction, like Berlin or Paris are becoming areas of booming startups. Like Paris this year has had the biggest number of investment so far. Even higher than London. So I think being in the right place, in the right market, as a startup, as an investor, it's crucial. So as an entrepreneur, I would suggest for any entrepreneur to be in the right space where the market and the ecosystem, when we talk about startup, it's a lot about ecosystem. So having a quick way to reach investors, close investors. I truly believe we now can work in from our homes with tons of tools, etc. But by the end, it's like a human interaction.
Yeah, yes. I mean, a lot of the companies that we look to for inspiration, as I've already mentioned, Airbnb, Uber, they're essentially data companies, right? They have no assets. They're all about also empowering trust between strangers online. But a lot of that comes down to data, Klaus. But, is there a danger in this sort of world where we feel the need to collect data about everything and everyone around us, that we just end up being sort of sponges for data and don't really know what to do with it? And, how do you monetize that data? That's an important aspect, presumably.
Well, interestingly enough, when I talk to some of our biggest customers, in certain areas, like in retail, of course, they start collecting more data than ever before. But then there are industries where companies always had a lot of data, but never used it, and didn't even look for ways to access it. So for example, when you look in automotive machinery, that has rapidly changed. And this is why new models that actually, are disruptive are coming up. So for example, the loop of, using data all the way through a product life cycle and channel it straight back to development, to shorten development cycles, to get closer to customers. That is all going on. I don't think, we don't have technical limitations anymore to work with data and analyze data. I think 10 years ago, there would have been limitations. Today, there aren't. We have the bandwidth, we have the capacity. So the question is, and I think that's the key, what is the additional value of all the data that we collect and that we analyze. And I think that is going to be the game changer.
Ben.
So you used two examples of companies that are, for a journalist or for a trend watcher, quite interesting. But it's not the story. The story is that we're looking to things like employment, development, creation, education, things that the society needs. And with all due respect, an Airbnb or an Uber is not going to change that. They're not going to create the massive opportunity for the next generation. They are things that are, from a trend point of view, interesting. But the real question that we have to answer is this. If I would be in this audience 10 years ago, and I would earn $100,000, and I would have a car in front of my door, and I could bring my kids through college. If I go to the same position now, today, I would probably have 60,000 instead of 100,000. My car still would be there, would be on a loan, and I have no idea how I bring my kids through college. That is because the comparative value of knowledge is going to change. That means that we need to think through, from a added value point of view, what it is that we create and bring to do the basic needs of society to flourish. I don't think you go to talent. I think that's a misconception. We create more talent, so there are more places that new things can start. But we need to create an environment that we get them into the society as a positive instead of a negative.
And who's responsible for creating that environment, though? Because, you know, when you talk, so we as business people and entrepreneurs,
Absolutely.
The government has a role
Absolutely.
to play, parents, everybody.
No, well, if you say everybody is responsible, then nobody is responsible. What I'm saying is this. It is not enough to talk amongst ourselves. You have to talk with the world around you. Those are your future customers, your future employees, your future value creators. And I think it is true that we can do a lot with big data. But what we do with it, whether it's the next home delivery of food, where we already have 20, or you're going to do something that is materially important for a customer base, makes a huge difference. So the question is, what do we do with it?
Well, it's a brilliant question to end on. We're going to fill you up with a bit more caffeine and networking so you can mull over the points that we've made today. I hope you found it useful. You know, if you are doing business in Europe, I think sort of the general theme from the panelists is, you know, look to the differentiators of that. You know, look to use those advantages rather than focusing on perhaps the barriers that you know, may give you a more negative outlook. Look to cooperation. You know, as a smaller company, you know, think about the opportunities of cooperation with bigger companies, and certainly with bigger companies, look about folding those features into your offering on a sort of cooperation basis. And finally, don't disrupt just for the sake of disruption. You know, it's one of those buzz phrases that the more we use it, the less meaning it has. And perhaps some of the best business models are actually to look at how you can enhance existing strategies and technologies as well as disrupting marketplaces. So thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and please a huge round of applause for Chris, for Ben, Klaus, and Barbara. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.